Hello friends. For today's video, I wanted to go through a list of books that Booktube does not seem to care for that much, but that I did enjoy. And I've done two similar style videos to this, but slightly tweaking the wording. So we have one that was Booktube loves these, but I do not. And so that one was getting more into unpopular opinions territory, the books that everybody seems to shout from the rooftops about. And I'm like, oh, in my own little corner, hiding, being like, I don't really get it. And then we have the ones that Booktube loves and that I love too. So when you are on the rooftops alongside everybody shouting about how great something is, and it can kind of make you feel a little bit basic, but also sometimes it's fun. And then today we're leaning into not really either of those extremes. It's more of just some people didn't really care for these, but like I thought they were pretty good. These are not by any means all-time favorites or hardcore 5-star. I don't even get how people could possibly dislike this. It's just people don't seem to like them. I get it. I understand the criticisms, but I, at the end of the day, didn't find that those criticisms, while maybe I agree with some of them, they didn't really make it a less enjoyable reading experience for me. Obviously, all of these are analyzing how we fit in with our reading tastes to the community's reading tastes. If you're interested in seeing those, I'll have those linked. But I do like to assess from time to time, just because I think it's one, interesting to dissect our own feelings. Introspection, I think, is a good thing. Why do some things resonate with us? Why do some things not? And why do they resonate for our friends? Or why do they resonate for other people? How come sometimes we can have completely different tastes from somebody, and then we both will find something that we think is incredible? I just think it's really interesting and fascinating. So even though it's kind of more of a sillier topic, I do think that there's a little bit of depth when we analyze these sorts of things. But jumping into the list officially, the first ones I want to start with are actually just books by a specific author. I've picked up two of her books. The author would be Jennifer Saint. The books I have picked up would be Electra and Ariadne. Ariadne to me was borderline irritating because I find the original story it was based off of to also be mildly irritating. It's kind of how I feel about any Romeo and Juliet retelling. I don't like that story. Also, West Side Story, I'll extend it to that, because even though even West Side Story feels inspired by Romeo and Juliet, some things are more West Side Story inspired, some things are more Romeo and Juliet inspired, and I don't even care because all of them, like, they never work for me. I always think everybody's really irrational and stupid and reckless, and they drive me up a wall. So Ariadne was leaning into that territory for me, but I kind of respected that we didn't feel the need to change the story completely, because obviously it's a retelling. And I liked that we sort of stayed true to the overall events of the original, but we zeroed in on somebody that we don't typically zero in on. And for me, that's what makes retellings more interesting, is like, what about that character that was off in the shadows over there? How would they have analyzed and assessed this entire situation? I think those characters are interesting to explore. So I appreciated Ariadne, even though it borderline irritated me at the same time. I actually think I enjoyed the themes within Electra a lot more, because so much of that was about how our principles can very much be swayed by whatever the collective thinks, whatever the majority of people think, the masses think, or if we have an influential figure in our life and they're bestowing upon us their ideals, how that can conflict so strongly with somebody who maybe is more differentiated and they don't hold the same opinions as everybody else, or their eyes have been open to what they feel are the flaws within society. And then what about when those two people care about each other? What is the end result? So I liked the themes within that. However, I do think, one, a lot of people are just done with retellings, especially any kind of Greek, Roman, Norse type of retellings. We've seen them so often, and Jennifer Saint, her books entered the picture at a time when we've seen this blowing up of retellings, so I understand a lot of people are tired of them. Second, a lot of people have very strict criteria for what works with them, not just for retellings, but specifically for the Greek and Roman and Norse retellings. They know a lot about it, or they have certain expectations that they feel are important to be met, and those tend to not matter as much to me. So when I was talking about earlier, sometimes I'll even agree with criticisms. It just doesn't take away the overall reading experience for me. I think this is a good example of it. I saw somebody with the book Electra. They mentioned that they didn't like that Electra had a K in it, but then I think it was the character Cassandra was still a C. And I'm like, that doesn't matter to me, but I'm not trying to say it shouldn't matter to other people. It just, with the themes that I was actually quite gripped by, the K versus C spelling wasn't gonna really alter my overall feelings of the story. But I do want to really emphasize that I think it's completely fair for people to have those specifications, because I know for myself, if I pick up a story and it is heavily music oriented and there are things that are not accurate, it can very much bother me. And that actually segues us into the next author, and that would be V.E. Schwab. It's not always going to be authors. Sometimes it's just going to be specific books. But I find that despite the fact that V.E. Schwab is obviously very, very successful, and she is, for a lot of people, a household name at this point when it comes to fantasy, and I have enjoyed pretty much everything by her I've picked up, despite that, I just don't really find that Booktube is as gung-ho and as happy about her works as some of the other household names. For example, Booktube definitely seems to really like Joe Abercrombie. Booktube definitely seems to really like Brandon Sanderson. And V.E. Schwab doesn't seem to have that same level of fandom on Booktube. So there is always a part of me that I'm like, where are the fans? I guess they're just not online, which is great for them. You know, nobody has to be online to be a part of a community. And if they don't even want to be a part of the community, they just want to enjoy her works, that's great too. But I know her works are popular. I know lots of people love them. So it is almost jarring to come onto Booktube and then sometimes see more neutral to negative things expressed about her works. Of course, there are still plenty of people on Booktube who like V.E. Schwab, but based off the level of success that she has, you would think Booktube would maybe mirror that a little bit more, and it doesn't seem to as much. And as I said, I have enjoyed pretty much everything I have read by V.E. Schwab. The reason I segued into this with the music point is that while I do like the Monsters of Verity duology quite a bit, there are a couple of moments in that I'm like, that's not really how stringed instruments work, you know? You don't just like usually suddenly, because it makes the stakes higher, have your strings all snapping pretty much at the same time. But that's okay. I wasn't upset. It didn't ruin the book for me, but I'm like, all right, I'll suspend disbelief. It's fine. So again, I'm using that point to say I understand the people that have certain expectations of retellings. However, it doesn't usually, even over here, as a musician, when there's a music thing, it doesn't usually ruin stories for me when those specifics. It can. There are instances where there's a scene that will be so unbelievably stupid in a book that I'm like, I can't get over this scene. So it just is a matter of how much specific things irk you. Nothing in V.E. Schwab's books have ever irked me to the point that I have disliked them. I have liked all of them, some of which I would even say I have loved. But anyway, moving on. Next up we have Yellowface. Yellowface seems to be back and forth. Some people really enjoyed it. Some people really loved it. There's a lot of people that really didn't feel like it hit as hard as R.F. Kuang's other works. And I thought that it was funny. I thought it was satirical, which obviously it was a satire. But I mean, I found that it utilized satire really well. I liked that it wasn't just what I think the marketing kind of pushed. The marketing very much pushed that it was a criticism of the publishing industry. But I think that it was broader than that. I think it was a criticism of all of us here on Booktube, people on Book Twitter, people on Instagram. It was a way to look at pretty much the entire sphere of bookish people, and it highlighted the negative sides to pretty much every single one of these groups, and then it put it on blast, and I enjoyed it. I did like that nobody was safe. Everybody got made fun of. I liked that. It wasn't like we have this group of over here is great and perfect and they do nothing but good, and then big bad evil publishing or something like that. It was sort of a let's look at all the negative sides and the hypocrisy of every single little niche within this greater collective group, and then let's talk about those negatives in a way that is entertaining. And I was entertained. I thought it was great. I do understand Babel has really deep themes. So for some people going from Babel, which was her work just before, to going to Yellowface, they were maybe a little disappointed. Obviously, her first trilogy is much more fantasy, historical fantasy. So if you like that kind of thing, then Yellowface is especially not probably going to be appealing to you. obviously you can have overlap between the genres you pick up, but if that's what you were wanting more of, you're not getting that in Yellowface even a little bit. So she went from some bigger things, some bigger topics, to something a lot more narrow in its scope, and I actually think that it was great. I thought she did a good job of it, but I look forward to seeing whatever she puts out next, because I think that her books, at the very least, are always conversation starters. After that, this next book might be kind of the one that really inspired this video, and I don't even think it's a matter of, well, some people maybe kind of like it, but I definitely like it. I feel like more than the average booktuber. No, I feel like nobody liked this, and I am like, I thought it was okay. And that would be Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong, and I even would see people say, I just don't know how we went from, and they would talk about her previous works, to this one. Be like, where's that same author that gave us this? And I'm like, here and improved upon. I thought I read some of her stuff from before, and I quite liked the creativity with Immortal Longings while still giving nods to the story that it was somewhat inspired by. I liked the different setting that we got in this compared to the types of settings I usually see in fantasy and science fiction. So I enjoyed this one. Was it a little edgy? Yes, certainly. I think if edginess isn't really your thing, this one is edgy to the extreme, but I had fun with it. And I actually did a whole video dedicated not just to the book, but the way in which do we sometimes have, and this could relate to R.F. Kuang actually too, certain expectations of authors based off of what they did in previous works, or also, I should say, do we have certain views of authors based off of how we see them in their specific current demographic that they appeal to, and do we hold them to that? So with this particular author, I noted that I actually think some adult fantasy, science fiction fantasy fans would like her if this was just a nobody author who happened to come through like Tor or Orbit or something. But because I definitely find, from my anecdotal experience, that she was appealing more to a book talk crowd, that when she wrote Immortal Longings, it was pretty heavy on the descriptions and the world building. And if you're somebody who that's not typically something that appeals to you, book talk, by the way, fans can enjoy things with lots of in-depth world building. So I'm not trying to imply that they wouldn't. But there's certain pockets that care about certain things more than other groups, generally speaking. And so I'm like, is it that we kind of just marketed her wrong? Did we market her to the wrong audience? When people hear Chloe Gong, do they think automatically book talk, and then they have views of book talk, and then they're like, that's not what I like though? I just thought it was a really interesting thing to sit back and watch, because I really I genuinely feel like maybe more people would like that one. But anyway, this whole video is not dedicated to Immortal Longings. I already did that. We'll switch now to one that, speaking of there being certain books that people have certain impressions of because of book talk, the Married to Magic series. So I've read 3 of the books in this series. They're all standalones, but they exist within the same world. And they usually follow a human woman who somehow gets involved with some magical group. So you have fae, you have elves, and you have vampires in the 3 that I read. And then somehow they come together and it's a love story. I think that these are not really going to be as spicy as a lot of other works. In fact, they're not that spicy, to be honest. Like, not really much. When you compare it to other stories, they basically don't have spice. So I think that there are some people that maybe, if they are looking for that, the fans of something like Fourth Wing, or I think later Sarah J. Maas works can be a little more explicit. If they're looking for more of that, they're not really finding it in these. These are a little bit on the cuter side. They get mocked pretty relentlessly, and I was surprised when I saw that, because they lean almost into cozy fantasy territory, I think. But because of the covers, which have certainly very like lush, beautiful, vibrant colors, and look at, it's almost the old school hunky man and the woman whose sleeves are falling off her shoulders. It's almost that, except more fantasy looking. And I don't know, I just feel like we have this way of we've internalized those old covers and we associate that with cheesy and worthy of mockery, which isn't to say anybody who disliked this is just trying to tap into a certain, like, I just want to make fun of it just to make fun of it. Some people genuinely probably think that they're really stupid, but I thought they were fine. Again, I think they like kind of lean into cozy territory, and I never have come out of them being extremely upset. There's nothing in them that I think is extremely absurdly stupid. The characters aren't the kind that are obnoxious. They're just kind of people. They're slightly muted. And I do think the characters can be flawed, but then they learn to love each other along the way, you know, all that kind of stuff. I just don't think that they're as ridiculous as some other things out there. So I think I'm always a little surprised when I see people hardcore hating on them. But if you're hardcore hating on them because you genuinely didn't like them, then I'm glad that you are expressing your honest opinions. I've just been surprised at the level of vitriol. Now, last one for today would be one that definitely, I would say for the most part, does have a lot of fans. However, there is a certain way of perceiving this book that I don't agree with, I guess you could say, because I'm like, no, I liked that element of it, so it's almost like I'm zeroing in on a specific element. And the book would be Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I do think this one, as a result of being part of the Cosmere, and the Cosmere has always been adult fantasy, I almost would argue this one's mismarketed, because it is, to me, much more YA leaning, and it does have a very sweet love story that is very innocent, and it's very much young love, first love, that kind of a feeling. And for some people, they looked at this and they're like, oh, Sanderson tries romance and he fails. And for me, it was cute. I thought they were cute. I thought they were sweet. I thought it was kind of delightful to watch the way in which they would slightly irritate each other or bother each other or be snippy with each other. But then they would grow, and they would, through their interactions, understand the other person a little bit more. They would grow to respect them, admire them, and eventually maybe have feelings for them. And I thought it was really cute. And the world was, in Sanderson fashion, very creative and interesting, and I liked the sci-fantasy blend. I also have no problem, I can always admit, I have bias toward this one because there were some inspirations taken from Final Fantasy X, which I love, but I do think there was kind of this instinct for some people because of how we view, one, romance in our stories, two, fantasy romance books. In a way, sometimes it can feel like Sanderson is the opposite because he's so PG with his romantic relationships in his stories. I think there is sort of this, oh, I don't want to read all these fantasy romance books, so I'll always be able to trust that Sanderson's not going to do that. He's sort of the opposite of that. And so when he did kind of lean into the love story, even though there is a lot more with the plot and the stakes and the world building, even though that's all still present, I do think that there was this sort of initial, wait, no, this isn't the Sanderson I know and love, and maybe that is just not somebody's cup of tea, which is perfectly fair. But for me, I'm always like, well, I like all those other things, the world building, the plot, I like character development, I like an interesting premise. And if I like all those things, adding a love story into the mix is not going to suddenly take away, unless the love story becomes ridiculous and we stop caring about the plot, we stop caring about the stakes. But I do think there was like this kind of tiny group of people that were like, oh, it's a romance. Blah. And I'm like, well, it doesn't bother me. Totally fine if it's not your thing. But I'm not going to be upset because there was a cute love story in a Sanderson story. But anyway, that's it for some books that, very generally speaking, it can feel as though Booktube can be a little bit hard on, or maybe doesn't just like at all and they hate, that I actually kind of enjoyed. I would love to know what are some books that this has been the case for you. And then, like I said at the beginning, I have ones that Booktube loves these and I don't, and then also the ones where I seem to line up with the popular opinion. So if you're interested in those, I'll have them linked. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.